In response to President Trump's increased tariffs on China, China responded by saying the U.S. must show respect before any talks go forward.
To talk more about it, Pete Sepp is the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Good morning, Pete. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
Interesting, Pete. You know, the thing is, China hasn't shown the United States respect when they ripped off American businesses for far too long. What was your reaction when you heard the news of China's response?
Well, I think respect would start at home with China. For example, all of the subsidized companies that are effectively being paid to compete with our companies by their taxpayers. That should be an outrage to taxpayers everywhere. That's what you call a non-tariff barrier to trade. The simple fact is that Chinese companies already start with a competitive leg up because their own government gives them money to do it. We also, though, have to be careful about our own policies, too. The fact is, we are at rough parity with China right now as far as the corporate income tax rate. China's is 25, ours is 21%, but when you add in the state rates, it's actually 26, maybe even a little higher. So those are things we need to pay attention to, regardless of what China is crowing all over about with respect.
Well, speaking of that, in response to Trump's tariff reversal, initially the stock market posted the third biggest gain in post-World War II history. Yesterday, we saw a bit of a mixed result, and today futures are up. But everyone doubted what Trump was doing until they saw these massive gains, Pete. So your thoughts on his strategy of boxing in China?
Well, it's important to remember that markets thrive on certainty, and the Trump administration pulled back, and this is the opinion of many analysts, because it wasn't the stock market, but rather the bond market that was showing signs of softening. When that happens, you realize, okay, time to pause, time to pull back, time to target the tariffs more narrowly. That's what they're doing here. Hopefully it'll work. Hopefully we're not going to see an uptick in inflation or any other kind of reaction from the business community that's going to slow our economy down further. That's what's important going forward, is to, if you're going to keep up pressure on China, focus on that. Don't go with broad-based tariffs that are going to further roil bond markets as well as stock markets.
Interesting. Well, Pete, you have some company today. We're joined by Richard Stern. He's the Director of Budget Policy for the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now. Greetings.
Hey,
Richard.
thank you.
So let's get right to it. We're talking about tariffs, of course.
Yep.
You know the news and how it's been going. So inflation fell last month as gas prices dropped sharply, showing a sign that prices have cooled off before tariffs and steadily going down. Seems that everything that President Trump is doing for the economy is paying off for the American people. How do you see it?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right about that. Look, it's important to remember that deregulation is one of the most important things you can do for economic growth. And part of the reason why energy prices are coming down is that, frankly, the Biden administration had basically declared open warfare on American energy producers. So the minute that Trump came into office, we had a reversal of that back to an agenda that was pro-growth for U.S. energy resources. And of course, we have to remember that you can't do anything without energy. So the more that we have a friendly environment for American energy producers, the more that energy prices come down and the more economic growth you get anyway. So that's a lot of what's going on there. And that's, of course, going to boost economic growth for the rest of Trump's term and then beyond.
That's right. Well, President Trump invited Charles Schwab into the Oval Office the other day.
This is Charles Schwab. It's not just a company, it's actually an individual. And he made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million. That's not bad, because he's in financials. I've always been fine.
Trump commented that his decision to pause tariffs sent the stock market soaring, and certainly Charles Schwab's investments as well. Pete, for anyone who says that Donald Trump is not paying attention to the stock market, to the bond market, I think this again shows that that's just not the case. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's good news that they are paying attention, that the better angels are guiding some of the policy of this administration. And I think one of the shining examples here is Treasury Secretary Bessent. He is emerging as a figure who's saying, let's be a little more strategic about trade policy here versus the Peter Navarros of the administration, who seem to be stumbling at times to justify some of their policies. So that's an important development. And again, to Richard's comment, energy policy is a really important component of this. It's incredible that we were even thinking of tariffs going back and forth on energy. We have all the supply we need in this country for ourselves and for exports. It takes deregulation and good tax policy to unlock those resources. We can do that without having to wait for any kind of trade agreement.
Wait, did someone say tax policy? Well, the House has passed a plan to advance Trump's tax cuts while giving the debt limit a boost. Your thoughts on this, Richard? And what could this do for the economy?
So this is a great step forward towards all the other things that Trump had promised, as you talked about. So this resolution, and the way I've talked about it is, you normally need 60 votes in the Senate to get major legislation through, but there's a legislative vehicle that allows you to do it with only 50 votes. Republicans, of course, have more than 50 votes in the Senate, but they don't have 60. So you need this budget resolution they just passed to unlock the ability to do a bill. The analogy I've made is it's a little bit like the budget resolution is getting approved for a car loan. The bill itself is the car. But to your point, it allows for extending Trump's tax cuts. It allows for building more tax cuts on top of that. Tax cuts Trump talked about on the campaign trail,
right.
Debt limit increase. But I think the other really important thing is it allows for money for border security, for bolstering defense, and it allows for at least $1.5 trillion of spending cuts to get rid of a lot of that wasteful and abusive spending, fraudulent spending that DOJ has been uncovering. So sky's the limit for how good that could be.
Well, Pete, we have to ask you a similar question. I mean, you're the president of the National Taxpayers Union. How important are these tax cuts for the American public, especially right now?
Yes, now it's Congress's turn to pay attention to the financial markets and do its job, extending the 2017 tax relief package to avoid a $4 trillion plus tax hike, building on that, and especially getting a handle on federal spending. I hear all kinds of wailing and moaning that the House of Representatives wants a $2 trillion spending cut or the Senate wants $1.5 trillion. Well, they're going to spend about $86 trillion over the same period of time they're seeking to pull back that $2 trillion or $1.5 trillion in spending. Congress can do that and more if they put their minds to it and they put their backs into it.
Yeah, totally. Richard, before you joined, we were talking about the the tariff battle between the U.S. and China. And it seems like China is showing some weakness. Yeah, they're trying to bump up the tariffs and catch up to President Trump, but it's more so what they're saying, what they're communicating from their leader. I should say, starting with President Xi. Mm-hmm. He stated that China and the EU should fulfill their international responsibilities, jointly safeguard the trend of economic globalization and the international trade environment, and jointly oppose unilateral acts of bullying. That is very interesting, Richard, because it seems like China is looking for support from other countries. Specifically, the nations within EU to try to take on President Trump. I see that as a sign of weakness.
Oh, absolutely. Look, President Xi came in 13 years ago promising to make China the global superpower, the global empire, and he has done the exact opposite. And I think what's important about this, frankly, is that it's not something that happened overnight. And I wouldn't say that this started, of course, with Trump's tariffs either. It really started decades ago with China's commitment to communist policies. There's no country that adopts those kind of policies that becomes prosperous or powerful because of it. And so what you're looking at is a country that after a decade and a bit of Xi's tyrannical rule, destroyed every inch of progress they were making by trying to liberalize and free their economy. And so now you're looking at a China whose entire financial system is predicated on bad debt, bad central planning arrangements, to the point where you could have Trump come in and say, look, we're tired of dealing with this. We're going to box China out of global economic affairs. And China has no recourse except a weakly worded letter begging the Europeans, the capital of regulation, to bail them out of their own mess. So it shows you exactly how well Trump's strategy is paying off, and it shows you the pitfalls of communism.
Right. And it also shows you that President Trump has all the leverage in this particular situation. We've even heard reports, Pete, that President Trump might delist Chinese companies from the New York Stock Exchange. Do you believe that this is wise?
Well, it's a feasible move. And again, earlier, as I had said, these companies are not actually competing the way that private companies in America or other nations in Europe do. They're subsidized by taxpayers. Some of them are even owned by the Chinese military. So what are they doing and being treated as if they're companies here in the United States and being afforded the same privileges? Doesn't make sense.
Interesting. So, Rich, I have to get your take on this with regard to the U.S. economy and what China is doing, the EU is doing. Put it all on a timeline. We need the tax cuts because we don't know how long this trade battle between specifically the EU, Canada, and China will play out. I think what's in our hands here in America is passing this tax bill, giving business as well as the American people a reprieve that provides a certain level of certainty amid this cloud of this tariff war. So how long do you give Congress to pass this bill, giving it time to work into the economy so that way going into the third quarter we have of course, some signs in the second quarter, but at least in the third quarter, this will all wash out, so to speak?
So I think the summer is the convergence point of all of these timelines. If you think through when the debt limit probably will be raised, and as you pointed out, the reconciliation, the budget resolution would allow for a debt limit increase in that reconciliation bill. So the summer is going to be when the debt limit needs to be raised. The summer seems like probably a fine time for committees in Congress to get all of their pieces of the bill together. The summer is a fine enough time to pass the tax cuts so that they can really start having effect and people can have certainty months before the new tax year. The summer, of course, is when the 90-day pause would expire on the tariffs. There's also one other part of this I think is important. Another small piece of that bill is likely to be permitting reform. It's a part of deregulation, but a crucial part of this I just want to highlight is for new factories to break ground, you need to have the federal government let people break ground. And that requires putting American middle-class families above spotted owls and sage grouses and all of the other animals that right now can get in the way of getting a permit to break ground on new factories. So that's I think, a crucial and under-discussed part of what should be and hopefully will be in reconciliation.
I agree. I mean, the last thing people want as they're laying in their beach chair is to be checking their portfolio every 5 minutes.
Well, yeah.
So summer is a good time to make sure everything balances out.
Right, and I believe July 9th is when the 90 days is set to pass. So we'll likely be probably doing just that, John, unfortunately. But Richard Stern, Pete Sepp, great to have you this morning. Happy Friday.
My pleasure.
You got it.